Boîte à souvenirs.
Hi everybody, welcome to our memory box.
On a reçu une demande de recherche, puis on s'est dit que ça serait bien de vous montrer comment ça se passe dans notre centre de documentation.
So quite often we get requests from people, different type of research. Today it's about someone wanted to know the date of construction of their house as well as history of occupants of the house.
C'est ça, fait que c'est l'adresse 47 Park. Il veut savoir un peu plus d'informations historiques sur la maison, l'année de construction, qu'est-ce qui a habité dedans, est-ce qu'il y a eu des ajouts, des choses comme ça. Fait qu'on va passer à travers nos ressources pour voir qu'est-ce qu'on peut trouver.
Okay, so the request is for 47 Park Street. The type of research and materials we're using, probably 3/4 of the stuff that's at our disposal. So this one was kind of easy. We get these requests. People want to know when their house was built. So that's usually the hardest part, finding out who occupied it. We have city directories and things like that can find it. So we'll go through that. But pinpointing, we use circa. If I can't find the date, quite often that's a building permit that says on this date in this year, a permit was given to this person for this residence. We only have permits after 1919 and after.
Ah, c'est seulement à partir de 1919 qu'on a vraiment des permis de construction qui désignent la date comme telle de la construction. Avant ça, c'est un peu plus difficile. Fait qu'on dit circa ou vers l'année. Ça donne une marge de 3 à 5 ans entre les deux. Là.
Right. That's normally when you say circa. Some people even go 10 years either way. I'm a bit of OCD. So to me, I think I usually can get maybe 1 to 2 years either side. When I say circa, it's usually something has bookended it within a very tight window.
C'est plus précis comme ça.
So we're going to start with this one, 47 Park Street. And the first thing that I do is I want to know what building I'm talking about today.
Qu'est-ce que ça ressemble? Oui, c'est ça. C'est une maison aujourd'hui? Oui.
Okay.
Fait que ça, tu vas-tu en ligne pour faire ça?
I do. I use Google Maps or Street View, and I just go and look where it is to see what the closest crossroads and things like that to geographically put it in my head.
C'est-tu sur un coin? C'est-tu à côté d'un autre édifice? C'est-tu...
That's right, because 47 doesn't mean much in research. Numbers of streets changed a lot in the city of Moncton.
Les adresses changeaient ou les numéros de rue de
That's right.
l'adresse changeaient. Fait que même si on a l'adresse, ça veut pas dire que c'est encore ça aujourd'hui.
Main Street, because of infills and expansions, probably was renumbered 3 times. So you think it's 300 and something, but 300 and something means something different in different eras.
C'est ça, c'est pas que l'édifice a bougé, là.
Non.
C'est que le numéro a changé. Fait qu'il faut savoir vraiment où se trouve la maison.
That's right. And looking at it too gives me an idea if I'm talking about new construction or if it's an older building that dates it style-wise in a certain period of time. So I know where to kind of start looking.
Ouais, mais ça, tu pourrais être comme, selon tes connaissances aussi en architecture, tu pourrais dire, ça c'est plus comme dans les 1800 versus, non, ça c'est plus comme dans les 1950. Fait que tu vas pas perdre ton temps à checker des ressources de 1800.
That's it, yeah. So we're going to take a look on Google Maps just to see what we're talking about. Okay.
Parfait.
So what I saw was that it's at the corner of Park and Highfield, which is awesome when they're at the corners of streets instead of sort of in the middle of a street. Then you're not kind of trying to pinpoint the PID. An artist rendering might put that house in the wrong spot, but corners are awesome.
Excellent. Parce que tu dis artist rendering, avant c'était souvent des dessins. C'est ça, pour montrer un peu en 3D les maisons. Puis c'est que c'est sur un coin, on sait que c'est sur un coin, là.
That's right.
Parfait.
Yeah. So what this building tells me is it's a vernacular, so a pretty generic kind of house in a neoclassical kind of inspired, which was a very broad range, but probably prior to the 1900s.
Oh.
So, but way back, like the first houses had that style up till you started getting into different style of houses. So at least it's
quand même très grand comme marge.
Yes, but it tells me not to start sooner. It tells me to start later. So the first thing that I would look for, one of the older maps, the oldest one that we really have that has houses is called the Walling map.
Oui, qui est en monte dans notre collection patrimoine. C'est une très très belle map. Quelle année?
1862.
62.
So 1862. The problem we discovered with that is people actually paid to be identified on that map, so it's not really accurate about what houses actually existed or didn't.
C'est ça, ça incluait pas tout le monde. C'était plus des familles qui se disaient ça, c'est notre terre. Fait que ça, c'est la terre des Leblanc, ou ça, c'est la terre des Cormier.
Right. So the next option, 1878, it's called the Row Atlas, which is pretty accurate. It has a page for Moncton that shows streets and house footprints. So we are looking for the corner of Park, which is above St. George by 2 streets, so Dufferin and then Park, which would be here, and Archibald, which doesn't exist.
Non, ça serait ici.
Yes, this sort of alleyway here. It looks like they were thinking of a road, but it's not there yet.
D'accord.
But what you see in this section is there's no development there. There will be.
Yeah.
It's been subdivided,
C'est ça.
but there are no houses.
Conceptuellement, ça s'en venait, mais pas encore physiquement.
That's right.
OK, fait que ça veut dire que c'est passé la date. C'est quelle année ça?
1878.
Fait que c'est après 1878
That's right. So that we know for sure.
que la maison a été construite.
Right. So the next thing that we look for, and these are bird's eye view maps.
Oh, j'adore ça, c'est tellement beau!
So we'll take a look at these. A lot of cities did these, and there's people, I think in St. John, that watercolor them and everything else. So they're quite nice. And they're fairly accurate.
Okay.
Not 100%, but they're enough to kind of give you an indication.
S'il y avait une maison là, ils l'ont dessinée. Ça se peut que c'était pas exactement les bonnes dimensions,
Right.
mais comme tu disais, me semble c'est aussi très bon pour dire c'est comme c'est 2 étages. Il y avait 3 fenêtres sur ce côté-là de la maison. Fait que ça c'est
Yeah,
indicateur.
so yeah, windows and things they tried, but spaces between buildings sometimes was skewed a bit. So again, we're going to look for
47 rue Park.
Park
C'est un
and
coin.
Archibald.
C'est ça.
Yes. So is Archibald on this? So there's Bodsford, Robinson.
OK, c'est après Robinson. Archibald.
Archibald is there. Okay. And we're going above St. George because it's Dufferin and then Park. So Dufferin and then Park.
On monte vers le nord.
Yeah.
Il y a rien.
There's nothing there. It's a
C'est
field.
divisé, c'est juste des champs.
And we start to see some houses where there weren't some in 1878, but there's a
Oui.
few houses up there. We're talking where the we're going to see it on the next one, where the Thomas Williams house was essentially the outskirts, like a field at the time.
C'est incroyable, il y a
Yeah.
tellement de maisons là aujourd'hui là.
Oh yeah, it's packed.
Oh wow.
So, no good with 1881. So we have one for 1888.
OK, 8 ans plus tard, 7 ans plus tard.
That's right. So, and what time of year these were drawn? Don't know. So it could have been, a house could have been built while it was being drawn. You never know. But so again, we're going to look for.
Wow, il y a des bateaux dans la rivière.
Well, there's, some of them show locks, systems, and stuff. That was conceptualized. They were going to use locks.
d'accord.
Never actually
Okay.
happened. Yeah.
C'est quand même fun.
Yeah. So here, there's like the harbor front proposed with locks and things. Never happened.
Je comprends.
So, again, here's Archibald. And where's St. George? There's St. George, 2 above. That would be Park Street. So you actually see
La
the
maison
top.
Thomas Williams.
There's nothing beside it to the
Nope.
west.
C'est
It
encore
is-
des champs.
It's a field. Yeah.
Mais c'est
So you
fun.
backtrack towards Archibald, and look, there's a house there. And if you look at the way it is now, the little piece that you see at the back isn't there anymore. But if you look at the windows in the front and the windows on the side of that building,
Oui.
right here, they're the same orientation as the windows that exist today.
Fait qu'il y a des fortes chances que c'est la même construction, la même édifice.
Same footprint. If someone was going to tear it down and rebuild, they weren't going to build it in the exact same style. So the fact that it looks the same and has the same windows means that western portion was added on to later, but we are talking about this building. So now we have 1881 not there, 1888 it is there.
Fait que ça a été construit définitivement entre 81 et 88.
Right.
Ah, mais c'est pas pire, là.
No,
C'est pas,
that's what, 5 minutes, and we've already determined within 6 or 7 years when the building was built. Unfortunately, there's no other documentation that really tells us at the time definitively like maps and stuff between 81 and 88. So the fact that it appears and doesn't appear and then it appears between those two maps, we do have one directory that's 1885, but you'd have to know the name of the person that occupied that place in order to kind of pinpoint it somewhere in the middle. So unfortunately for this one, you're really 1881 to 1888.
C'est plus précis qu'on peut y aller.
Yeah, that's about it.
Selon les ressources qu'on a, là.
That's right. Different time periods you get more accurate, but for this one, that's pretty much it. But now there's a question of that whole Western
C'est ça, il y avait
extension.
Une partie ajoutée.
That's right. So
Maison.
we are going to use, now it didn't appear in the 1888 map. That little
l'ajout,
Western,
là?
yeah, the little Western extension. So we go to things called fire insurance plans.
C'est ça, c'est des cartes d'assurance pour les incendies. Puis c'est intéressant la raison pour laquelle ils existent. De ça, j'ai compris, c'était à cause que dans certaines villes, il y a eu des gros feux qui ont détruit des grosses parties de la ville. Puis là, on avait besoin d'une manière de documenter, OK, ça, c'est ce qu'il y a là aujourd'hui. Fait que si l'année prochaine, il y a un feu, on va savoir qu'est-ce qui était là l'année passée. Fait qu'ils ont commencé à créer ces cartes-là.
Mid-1800s? Yeah.
Ou là, c'est devenu plus important de les faire.
Yeah, when you talk about the fires in Miramichi, the big fire in St. John, 1877, the idea of having a fire insurance map became so important because these were accurate. These were surveyed, accurate.
C'est pas des dessins, c'est pas des renderings artistiques.
And what's cool about these is the page 1 gives you an overall map of what's included, and it's divided by the pages that are close up, and it tells you the streets, tells you the street number, tells you an index. Yeah. So if we look here, we'll see Archibald and Park appears to be in sheet number 11.
Okay.
So we're going to go to number 11. Goes to 11. Here we go. And so now it's a close-up. And the colorized versions of these that came out later actually were color-coded by building material. So you could tell if it's made of wood, faced with stone, with brick, all that kind of stuff, where utilities were.
Noir et blanc, puis là, ils ont fait en couleur.
That's right, yeah.
Pour montrer les matériaux de construction. En bois, en briques,
en grès,
béton.
Yeah. So here we are, and we see Highfield, Bonaccord, St. George, Archibald. So what you see is Archibald actually doesn't quite go all the way up yet. But there's place for it. So we're going to go up, and there's the corner of Park and Archibald. And that's actually our building. It says 1.5 stories, and you do see those kind of extensions to the back, but not the western extension that we're talking about.
Ça dit dessus que c'est 1 étage et demi.
That's right.
Puis tu vois les petites extensions qu'ils ont ajoutées.
And what's cool about that is it says 1.5 stories, but later, even though it's the same building as it is today, call it 2 stories. And we'll get to that because there's actually an established rule about how you identify stories.
D'accord.
Might as well go through it now. A story has to have walls on the inside that are complete.
Faut que ce soit des murs complets pour que ça soit considéré comme un étage.
That's right. So this building is 1 full story, and then partway up the wall, about where the windows, halfway up the windows, is the beginning of the peak.
Oui.
So even though some people consider it 2-story because you actually see a window in the attic, so the attic would have been used for residential purposes as well. However, the attic is not considered a story.
No.
That second story has its walls half cut off, so it's only half a story. But because it's so big, it almost looks like 2.5 stories, but it's not. It's actually 1.5 stories because you only have half of a story.
Aussitôt que tu as le toit qui commence à couper dans le mur, c'est considéré un demi-étage.
That's right.
D'accord.
Which is cool for Second Empire, like the Thomas Williams house, les toits mansardes, the mansard roof that have sort of the Second Empire ones had those neat little things. The first little angle is technically the roof.
Oui.
But if you go inside the building, it's a full height room. The windows are embedded in that first slant of the roof. So you call it 1.5 stories, but in reality, in usable space, it's 2 stories. And the reason for that is you pay taxes based on the number of stories. So Second Empire was a neat way to get 2 full stories, but hey, that second story is part of the roof.
C'est ça,
Yeah,
là.
so they
À
ended up-
l'intérieur, c'est des murs complets avec des fenêtres, mais c'est que les fenêtres passent à travers du toit. à
The first part of that roof, yeah. So they used it to cheat the system on that one. So it's definitely there in 96. It still doesn't have that western extension. So we're going to go to the next fire insurance plan, which is this one.
Ils sont colorés.
Yes,
On a
we're
des
getting
codes
into
de
colors.
couleurs.
And this one was 1907, but revised to 1911. And again, they generally stayed the same sheet number going forward now. They just expanded. So 11 is still probably where we're looking. So
OK.
Archibald Park, number 11.
11. Puis c'est
So-
tout jaune.
Just to distinguish between
Ah, ça,
the
c'est
zones
pas
of the
les
pages.
building material encore. Là.
No, that's
Non,
once
ça,
we
c'est
get
après.
inside. Yeah. So I need page number 11.
OK, j'ai 4,
They're double-sided,
Ah.
so you'll see them on the other
5,
side. Yeah. So it's probably on the back of 10.
10,
There we go.
11.
Okay. So you see a lot of yellow,
Oui.
wood, construction. But
Jaune,
every
c'est
now and
en
then,
bois.
wait, rose, so pink is brick.
Brique.
I don't see much gray like this is an outbuilding, so that's just a secondary building.
Oh.
But if you look on like Main Street or something like that, you'll actually see blue. Or you see here, this one is surrounded by pink. That's a wooden building with a brick facade.
Ah, ça c'est
So it's got a
intéressant.
veneer on the outside, yeah.
Wow. Puis ça, c'était pour assurer par rapport aux incendies. Fait que ça disait, s'il y a un feu, ben aussi il y a une chance, mais je sais pas comment dire, pas que s'il y a une chance de feu, mais comme étant donné que là, c'est toutes, les murs sont toutes en briques autour d'une structure en bois,
That's right.
ben, il y a des fortes chances que la façade va survivre un feu versus le reste. On sait pas, là, mais c'est intéressant de voir.
Yeah, so very, very well identified. Some utilities as well, like where power poles are, telephone poles, things
oui,
like that.
oui, oui.
So, park, and where did Archibald go?
Là, c'est Robinson, fait que ça serait à... Ah, c'est gros.
Right here.
ici. Ouais.
So, here it is again.
OK.
Still 1.5
Après
stories. We're missing, so they've already taken
Ah.
away one of those secondary buildings in behind. They've streamlined it a little bit, but still no western extension.
Fait qu'il y avait une extension en arrière, puis ils l'ont enlevé.
Yeah.
OK.
And later there will be a
Mais-
house in there,
Ouais.
but right now,
Encore
still
pas
no
l'extension à
western.
l'ouest.
Yeah. So we'll go one further, and I don't know how many there are in between, whether they publish them every year. It was quite an undertaking. So I don't know if there's one between this one, 1911,
1911.
yeah, and this one also had some pages updated to 1914 as well. So I take this one as being possibly 1914.
OK.
So this one is, we'll see on the inside of this page here. These are still,
Comment on dit ça?
yeah,
Ah, ça, c'est
What
pour
date?
protéger le papier.
reprinted June 1921.
Oh! En
So-
1914 puis 1921.
That's right. So we have our
La
index
table
sheet
matière,
again.
ouais.
Again, if you look at number 11, there's Park and Archibald. Oh, it shifted a little bit because of infill. So number 12 is the sheet that we're looking for on this
Ah,
one.
OK.
It's usually pretty close. They adapted just like the street members as stuff infilled and they had to adjust things.
Ça fait penser au livre de cartes là, que tu vas voir, là, comme le New Brunswick Back Roads Map. Là, puis ça dit, comme ben, plus celui-là, ça disait C page ou C page 12 pour continuer par le nord. Ou C...
Yeah, it does that here. See page 13.
Pour aller
see,
par là, oui.
yeah, see page 11 to
Fun.
go this way. So, these were indispensable. The fact that we have these, if you guys have copies of these,
Ça, là, c'est...
even if we already have it and you want to donate it to us, we use these so much. We'd love to preserve one copy and use one as a working copy. Or if you have years that we don't have, absolutely indispensable resources, fire insurance maps.
Ouais, très précieux.
So here we go. Look at this. Archibald and Park.
Ah, OK. Ah, ben attends. Ah, c'est ça, là?
Yep,
Là, ça dit que c'est 2 étages,
that's right.
puis il y a l'extension à l'ouest.
That's right. So this one, like you said, says 2-story. Today it's the same. It's 1.5 stories. By established definitions.
Mhm.
Somebody decided that that extra sort of 1 1/4 story was a full story. That's not how it works. So sometime between 1914 and 1921, you get the Western extension. It's not 2 stories. It's still
No.
1 1/2 stories. It's a big 1 1/2 stories. It's
Est-ce
still
que
just
ça
one.
a changé leur taxe? qu'ils
Probably.
doivent payer? Parce que officiellement, là, ça a été dit que c'était 2 étages. Là.
This wasn't an assessment,
C'est pas...
like a tax assessment.
ouais, je sais pas comment
Une
dire ça.
évaluation des
Évaluation,
taxes. Yeah.
d'accord.
So would that influence tax? It's what the assessor, the provincial assessor would come and determine. I'm sure there was an argument between the owner and the assessor. No, it's
Ouais,
only 1
c'est pas le
1/2.
fire marshal qui décide comment tu vas payer de taxes.
That's right.
tu sais.
That's right. So now we have between 1914 and 1921, but we're not stuck there because we have building permits going back to 1919.
OK.
That extension would need a building permit,
Oui.
and building permits are sorted by people's names.
OK. Fait qu'il y a
So-
toute chance qu'on peut être plus précis avec la date, là.
So I didn't bring up the building permit books because they're very fragile.
Oh oui, OK.
But you literally go through from 1919 to 1921 and look for the name of the person that occupied it. And we'll get into occupation in a minute. But also by Park Street. So I'm looking for a Mr. Hoare or a Mr. That's early. So we will eventually see that a Mr. Powell has it
OK.
for a long period of time. During the time that the extension would have been put in was a Mr. Powell.
À partir de 1911.
Ish.
Ish.
No,
1908.
I would say about 1906, but we'll go through that in a minute. But between 1914 and 1921, it was definitely
C'était
Mr.
encore
Powell.
lui. OK.
So
On
I
va
go
voir.
through this page by page and look for a Mr. Powell
Mhm.
or Park Street,
Mhm.
and we know the address was 21 before
Ah, ça avait changé?
1911. Then it became 47.
D'accord.
So I'm looking for 47 Park Street or Mr. Powell anywhere in 1919, 1920, 1921 for building permits.
S'il y a eu le permis de construction pour ajouter
That's
l'extension
right.
du Ouest.
I didn't find any.
C'était pas là. Fait que c'était avant.
Right.
Non,
It
il
had
faut
to be
que ce soit
before
avant.
because we already know it
Parfait.
exists. So now
Enlève ces années-là.
that's right. So now we've established 1914
1914,
to 1918.
1918. Ah, ben ça, c'est juste 4 ans.
That's right. So now we've actually narrowed the extension down even more than the construction of the building.
Wow. Oui, c'est ça. Parce que ça a été construit en quelle année encore?
Between 81 and 88.
C'est ça. Puis l'extension, c'est 19, 14, 19,
That's right.
18.
So this person brought the request in, and what we've determined is it was constructed in the mid 1880s, 1881 to 1888, and the extension was put on between 1914 and 1918.
C'est tellement comme de l'information intéressante à avoir dans ta maison. Comment cette partie-là a été ajoutée des années après, mais c'est quand même longtemps après, là.
So let's grab the all those directories, because the other part of the equation is who lived there and what did they do. Some people find that
Ah,
interesting.
ben oui.
Okay.
Fait qu'on cherche quelle année?
Well, I did them in order. So we have some, and the reason I picked these, prior to 1899, city directories didn't have street directories. They just had the names of the people and sometimes just said Moncton.
Ça
So-
disait pas l'adresse.
So it was very hard to determine 47, or back then, 21 Park Street. So almost, unless you knew the person's name that owned it back then and found the person, and you'd have to guess that they were at that actual address. So 1899 actually has, if you flip it open, a street directory at the end of the book. You don't have to look for people. You can look for that civic address. So we are looking for Park Street, Pleasant, Mechanic, Park Street. And it tells you which streets intersect in a certain order from east to west or north to south.
Ah, okay.
So we know that a Mr. E.P. Hoare was on the west corner of Park at Archibald, and he was a bridge inspector,
Ça, c'était
bridge
quand-
for the railway. So he
Ah
was a
ouais,
railway
c'est
guy. Yeah,
cool. C'est sûrement, puis ce temps-là, l'adresse c'était 21 Park Street.
That's right.
Tu vois l'adresse.
that's right.
Yes,
And
sir.
what you see is you follow that person that's still on the corner of Archibald and Park, and then all of a sudden
Ça change de
it
nom.
changes to 47. with the same name at the same place with the
okay.
same intersection, and all of the numbers change. So you have to kind of determine it that way. So if it doesn't say bridge inspector here, you actually look them up now in the directory itself, and it would say bridge inspector with perhaps the wife's name.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ah, ben c'est
So,
fun.
Every now and then they
Fun.
put the wife in brackets, Eliza. It was always secondary,
Ah, ben là.
right? Because they never did anything, so let's just put them in brackets as a footnote, right? I mean, that's unfortunate, because quite often these days, more and more, we're getting research on women in history. When it's patriarchal like this, you can't, you can't really figure it out. So we know the first person, so we start back in 1899 is this Mr. Hoare, bridge inspector. And then you can go through every year. So 1903, he's still there. 1904, when you check that same address, it's an Amos Oblinus, who's a school inspector.
Fait que c'était plus Monsieur Hoare.
Nope, after a couple of years.
Monsieur Oblinus.
That's right. And then in 1908, it's a Mr. Powell.
Mr. Powell.
Yes, who's a brakeman
Ah!
with the railway.
Avec,
yeah.
oui. Ah, mon père était brakeman.
Oh, oui? Okay. Cool. And then what you see is all the way until the 1995 directory. We don't go much into the 2000s. It's hard. It's actually because it's digital. You actually start to lose that. It's a Mr. John Powell. Then when he dies, it's his wife, Mrs. J. Powell. So it doesn't even say Eliza Powell, it's Mrs. J. Powell. They both died the same year in 52. And then Constance Powell
Leur fille.
owns it for decades after that until the 1990s.
So
So
dans la famille.
it does for a long time. Like
Right.
he got it back in. We have it as 1908, but when we go to Service New Brunswick, I'll show you. There's a deed that you can't click on. It's 1906, but
Pour Monsieur
between
Powell.
1904 and 1908, it switches from Oblinus to Powell. I'm presuming that 1906 deed is the transfer to Mr. Powell from Mr. Oblinus. In order to guarantee that, you'd have to go to Service New Brunswick, find that book, actually go to the page and see what that arrangement was. But that's a pretty good guess that 1906, that deed is Mr. Powell taking it on. So from 1906 until the 1990s, it stayed in the Powell family.
Ah, ben c'est fascinant.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Oui.
So there are other resources we use. I'm not going to go through them all, but they change a little bit depending on which year the thing was built,
Ouais.
what resources we have.
Puis c'est fun parce qu'il y a même une piste pour aller en chercher même plus à Service Nouveau-Brunswick. Fait que c'est une bonne place à commencer pour voir qu'est-ce qu'on a. Puis là, des fois, Archives New Brunswick a des ressources en
Sometimes,
plus.
yeah.
Service Nouveau-Brunswick.
And that's where I found that the stuff seemed to happen around 1952. So I went to Provincial Archives in New Brunswick, found the death certificate of Mr. Powell, and his wife was listed as Eliza, but then in the same year, only a few months later, Eliza Powell passes away, widow to Mr. John Powell. So that tells me in 52, that's when all these transactions of transferring deeds and stuff would have happened. So finding out when someone died tells you a little bit about when transactions would have happened. So
Ah, c'est fun. On est comme des détectives.
that's what it feels like sometimes. And you find that piece and sometimes you don't find it and you keep it in your brain and then you're researching something else and you come across something from a year ago. That proves that it was done in this year. So it's always in your brain. Yeah.
Je trouve ça fascinant dans une plus vieille maison quand tu rentres dans une salle qui a l'air vraiment plus âgée. Puis comme c'est quoi l'histoire? Ben là, ça nous dit, c'était bâti quelques années après. Puis ouais, c'est vraiment le fun. Puis je sais pas si vous le saviez, mais le centre de ressources, c'est disponible pour tout le monde avec rendez-vous. Vous avez juste besoin d'appeler notre collègue Brigitte, la coordonnatrice des collections et du centre de documentation, faire un rendez-vous, apporter votre masque, puis votre idée de recherche, puis on va vous aider avec ça.
And it can take me, depending on if I get that little bug or not. Usually, we do research. We'll do a little bit of research for you for about an hour.
C'est ça. Mais là,
It sometimes takes me a half an hour or less to determine the date.
puis des fois, tu sors des ressources, puis là, on vous laisse garder à travers, puis tu peux prendre plus de temps aussi. Là,
But you can email us too at info@resergo.ca. Say, hey, I bought a new house, or I want to know about my house. It's this address. Give us a couple weeks. We get a lot of requests.
C'est ça.
And then we can supply you with a little bit of information, and if you want more information, come see us.
C'est ça, vous n'avez pas besoin de rentrer sur place, on peut même faire la recherche pour vous autres. Mais c'est l'invitation est ouverte. Fait que voilà, merci beaucoup, on vous verra la prochaine fois.
Bye!